Hello, welcome to this very special edition of the Pace Report. I'm Brian Pace reporting live here at the famous Birdland Jazz Club here in New York City. This week, blessing the band stage is an iconic, if not very important, arranger, producer, as well as pianist to the world of jazz. Mr. Dave Matthews blesses the band stage with the legendary Eddie Gomez and Steve Gadd performing brand new music from his new album, Sir, which is a myriad of both original songs as well as songs that he loves as far as standards from the idiom of jazz as well as R&B and soul. Now, in a career spanning some 5 decades, Mr. Matthews was the staff arranger for Creed Taylor Records, and he arranged and produced some great records with the likes of Miss Patty Austin to the great Hank Crawford, just to name the endless few. But this gentleman has also scored as well as orchestrated some very important motion pictures, including The Stepford Wives as well as The Parallax View. Tonight I had a chance to sit down and break bread with Mr. Matthews to reflect on his role as an arranger as well as producer, as well as talk about his very important roles arranging for the legendary James Brown, as well as musicians like the great Patty Austin, as well as David Sanborn, and also the great Frank Sinatra. Tonight you're going to see highlights of his official record release performance here at Birdland with the great Eddie Gomez as well as Steve Gadd. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the great Mr. Dave Matthews live performing music from his brand new recording, Sir, live here at Birdland here in New York City as part of the Pace Report. Matthews. It's an honor to be sitting down with you. Welcome back to New York.
Well, thank you very much. It's really great to be back in New York, and especially playing in one of the best jazz clubs in New York, and with two of the best musicians in the world. So this is a really great time for me, and I'm really glad to be able to talk to you about this.
Tell me about the first time you met Steve Gadd and Eddie Gomez.
Okay, I think it was in 1970. I had just moved to New York, and somebody told me about this arrangers clinic at Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York. Steve Gadd's hometown is Rochester. So we rehearsed for a few weeks with a band for this class, and getting ready for the concert. And the drummer for this orchestra got sick or something, couldn't do the concert. And the teacher that was leading this, Rayburn Wright, he says, well, don't worry, we can get Steve Gadd. Well, Steve Gadd, I think, he was probably 17, maybe 18 at that time, but already had a reputation of being a top-level pro drummer. And so Dr. Wright called Steve, and he came and rehearsed one hour with us, and then did the concert. And I said, wow, that guy, that kid, he's like 2 or 3 younger than me, that kid is really a wonderful drummer. So that was my first introduction to Steve. In terms of Eddie, I started a group in 1984 called Manhattan Jazz Quintet, which had very, very big sales in Japan, and it made me somewhat of a celebrity band leader in Japan. And the second tour of Japan that we did, the original bass player wasn't available, and so Steve suggested I call Eddie. So Eddie, the second tour we did of Japan, Eddie Gomez was the bass player in Manhattan Jazz Quintet, and of course I loved the way he sounded, and I of course knew about him from Bill Evans' trio and all that kind of thing. So what a joy to have two of the best musicians in the world playing in my trio here at Birdland in New York.
Eddie, tell me the first time you met Dave Matthews.
Wow, I don't really recall. I guess Dave called me to do a perform or a recording album, maybe. That sounds more logical. But I really don't. I don't recall. I know that we've played together a lot over the last 35 years or so, but I don't recall the exact moment that we met. He might, but I don't.
This recording is real special. It's you and friends. I mean, it's you and Steve and David. What is it about David as a band leader and as a friend that has kept you guys together, and what he brings to the music?
Well, I think not unlike David's playing, he's kind of a minimalist. There's not a lot of extraneous notes, and also when it comes to the music, it's clear and simple, straightforward. So, and that helps. It just helps the music be as good as it can be, and so I think that's another reason. And Dave was very nice to get along with. We get along. We all get along. The three of us get along very well. So all that means we have a good success rate level of all those components add up to a positive result.
You have cut your teeth in every facet of the music industry. We're talking about composing, band leading, arranging, composing, and let's begin with the beginnings of this, because from my understanding, my research on you, piano and arranging didn't start off. You started off playing a wind instrument.
That's partially true. Maybe it's really true. My mother tells me that when I was 3 years old, that I was fascinated plinking on the piano. I was fascinated with the sounds. I didn't know anything about music or harmony or anything, just ping, ping, ping. But I spent, she said I spent hours a day just playing with the piano. Later on, I think when I was 10 years old in the public school music, I could study an instrument. So my father bought me a used cornet, and so I played cornet in the fourth and the fifth and the sixth grade. And then my teacher said, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of trumpet players and cornet players. If you really want to be successful, you should play an instrument that not so many people play. And he switched me over to French horn. And during my entire, junior high and college, high school and college, I became a French horn player, played in all the bands and orchestras in the various schools. So. Yes, I was a French horn player. Then, how do you make a living in jazz with a French horn? A few people can, but very few. But I continued to play piano all during that time, and so then when I got into college, I started playing for money, playing professional gigs. And in fact, I think I paid for 3 years of college. Playing the piano, so I'm real happy about that. And then when I got back to New York after I lived in Europe for a while, I was an arranger, and I made my living writing music, and then the New York studio scene just kind of died. I'm not sure why. About 1985, the studios started closing, and there was no more recording. I think it might have had something to do with the computers. People could record at home on their computer and get the same quality of sound that they could get in a $200,000 recording studio, and so I think computers killed the recording business as it used to be in New York. So at that time I started playing the piano for a living. So.
Gomez.
You've had a lot of skills: arranger, producer, orchestrator. First, tell my viewers what the role of an arranger is.
Well, a composer composes a melody, like Errol Garner composed Misty. He composed a melody, bum bum bum. That melody all by itself is not satisfying to listen to. It needs harmony. It needs rhythm. It needs orchestration. Now, an arranger fills in all those things that the composer did not do. Of course, a composer can be an arranger and vice versa, but the composer's job is to compose a melody, and the arranger's job is to kind of clothe that melody with harmony and rhythm. So that's what I spent a lot of years in New York doing, was somebody else, sometimes my melodies, but a lot of other people's melodies. I recorded them in a way that people want to listen to.
Now, explain to my viewers what the role of a producer is.
A producer is the music businessman who deals with the money and with the record company and the musicians. So he's the kind of the middleman who some producers are very, very creative, and they instruct the musicians what kind of music they want and what songs they want. Others are simply money men who have a relationship with both the musicians and the record company, and work out the financial dealings of a recording.
You know, Dave, you have recorded and produced and worked with musicians ranging all music gamuts: blues, pop, R&B, and soul, jazz. As an arranger as well as a producer, what do you tell musicians who want to segue into becoming a producer or even an orchestrator? What do they have to do?
Well, a producer and an orchestrator is a very different situation. To become an orchestrator, you need to study music. You need to find, for example, a composition teacher. I've had several when I was much younger, and learn how music works, and learn how instruments sound, so that you can write arrangements that they'll sound good. The producer. There's various types, but mostly he's the money man who's in between the musicians and the record company. There are some very, very creative producers. I worked some with Ahmet Ertegun. He produced so many hit records back in the 60s and I guess 70s, and he's one of those creative
He was a mastermind. He was a
Yeah.
he was a jack of all trades.
Yeah. And I didn't even know it. I think he played piano, but I had no idea. He stopped many years ago, but he was a very, very creative producer and enjoyable to work with. So you got both sides. You got guys who are simply money managers that put the artist and the record company together, and then you've got the ones who do that as well as influence the music, choose tunes and that kind of thing.
Now, as an arranger, who were some of the people that you admired and kind of looked up to when you were developing your ear as a composer and as well as an arranger?
Well, as a young arranging student, so to speak, I saw a record at the little small music school I was going to in Louisville, Kentucky, and I listened to it, and it was a big band and kind of spacey and stretched out, and I didn't like it very much. So I put it back on the shelf, and a year later I listened to it again, and I said, wow, this is the deepest, heaviest music I ever heard in my life. It was Miles Davis's recording with Gil Evans of Miles Ahead. And when I heard, by then I guess I was capable of understanding and appreciating the harmonies, the counterpoint, and the orchestration that Gil Evans did on that record. And so Gil has, since that moment, been my biggest inspiration in terms of arranging.
And Gil was also the master of less is more. His big band sounded like it was a gigantic band, but it really was kind of small.
That is absolutely right. He knew how to take a small thing and make it important and make it big. Yeah, he was a master at that.
Was it different arranging for jazz, like your big band, versus R&B and soul? Because we're going to go into Mr. Brown in just a second.
Well, basically it's music. The different styles of the R&B and funky stuff is much simpler harmonically, and in some sense much more complicated rhythmically. Not always, but so the Gil Evans orchestration is a totally different thing than James Brown's funky rhythm. Although later on Gil put some pretty funky rhythms underneath his own when he had his band playing down at where was that joint? Anyway, he had a down in the Village. Anyway.
Was it Vanguard?
No.
Village Gate?
No. Oh, I'll think of it. We can edit that in, but it was.
This is the album, and I think I know what we're talking about. This is the record he did the big tribute to Jimi Hendrix. David Sanborn was on that record.
Yes, he was. Well, I didn't really know Gil. In fact, one of the big kind of disappointments in my life was how accessible Gil really was, and I didn't know it, and so I didn't hang out with Gil, but a lot of my friends did, Luce Olof and David Sanborn, and actually, Chris Hunter also, who started out as a kind of copying David Sanborn's sound. Chris Hunter is a British guy, English guy, and Gil on tour in England heard him play and invited him to come to New York. So Chris Hunter, under Gil's invitation, came and played in the Gil Evans Orchestra for as long as it lasted. Then Chris also played in Manhattan Jazz Quintet and Manhattan Jazz Orchestra. So that sound that David Sanborn created really affected a huge amount of American pop music.
I think David Sanborn and the Brecker brothers, they kind of formulated a whole different style.
They absolutely did. And by the way, I arranged David Sanborn's first LP. I was supposed to produce it. I got a deal with Muse Records, which is a very small label. Then somebody got a bunch of money from a major label, and so I ended up just arranging it, not producing it. But that was greatest funky musicians in New York, all in the same room together, Brecker Brothers and Sanborn. I used them on anytime I needed a small horn section, funky horn section sound. I used those three guys on many, many, many recordings.
What's so very special about Dave Matthews and your friendship with him?
Well, Dave and I have a lot of history together. I mean, he got me on James Brown sessions. We co-wrote a solo album of mine together. We did MJQ, that was a lot of years of seeing each other and playing. And then there were a lot of years where we didn't, and it's great to have the opportunity to do it again.
You know, Steve, you guys have had the opportunity to record and tour together. What is it about the next generations that need to understand his legacy?
It's just, just listen to, listen to some old James Brown stuff, and the Manhattan Jazz Quintet. Just check the music out. That's the best way to remember it, right?
That's right. This is my favorite part of the interview. We're going to dissect and reflect on some very important parts of your musical career.
Okay.
And one of the big important things that you have done in your life was you were the staff arranger and producer at Creed Taylor Records from about 76 to
CTI
yeah. And Kudu Records also.
Kudu Records, right. CTI was for the classier stuff, and Kudu was for the funkier stuff. So, I did that for 3 years, and I learned a whole lot about record production. Creed Taylor is a master record producer, and he had a very strong reputation for making not only really creative records, but high-quality sound recording. During those CTI days, I was over at Rudy Van Gelder's studio in New Jersey, just about 5 days a week for about 3 years. So that was a great time. We made a whole lot of good records.
Tell me about Rudy Van Gelder. Rudy is legendary because if we listen to anything from, I would say, 1951 to up until he died, he was very responsible for the sound of jazz.
Really, what was that label that he that first started using him? Very famous jazz label.
Was it Prestige?
I don't think so. There was another one. Anyway, for some reason, the jazz producers liked his sound. Well, for some reason, I said, because his sound was so clean and beautiful. You gotta like it, So, I don't know about the other producers, but Creed didn't want to record anywhere else but at Rudy's. And I don't blame him at all, because the sound was really great.
At Creed Taylor, CTI Records, it was you, Pee Wee Ellis, and Bob James, one of the great arrangers of that label. What was it about you guys that added a whole wide range of sound and elements to some of those records that you were producing and arranging?
Well, I don't want to talk about myself, but those people that Creed called were the best arrangers around at that time. Bob James, Don Sebesky, So Creed was very conscious of quality. He wanted very high quality recordings. He wanted very high quality arrangements and production. So he sought out the people who could give him that quality, and luckily I was one of them.
A couple of your highlights, and we talked about this earlier, you arranged on Patty Austin's very first record.
Yeah. Actually, I had known Patty before I started working at CTI, because she was one of the top jingle singers in New York. She was recording jingles all day long, every day. And so I was also in the jingle business, in and out, and so very frequently I recorded with Patty Austin. So she was somebody I really knew. And then when Creed found her somehow and decided to record her, it was like working with an old friend.
Tell me about, this is my favorite saxophonist, Hank Crawford.
I also was a great fan of Hank Crawford. I first became aware of him when I think he was playing lead with the Ray Charles Big Band, and I loved Ray Charles, and I heard that big band live with him playing lead on it. So that was the first time I got kind of caught up with Hank Crawford's music. And then when I started at CTI, he was a CTI artist, or kudu, I guess it was probably. And I think I only recorded one session with Hank. I think I did.
I told you that Love Won't Let Me Wait. That's a beautiful song.
Yes, that's Hank, right? Yeah. I remember doing one session. I don't remember the tunes or how many tunes we did. We probably did 5 or 6 tunes, but yeah, I remember that one session with Hank because I was a fan of Hank. So.
You know, Creed Taylor was also instrumental too. One of the beautiful things about that label were those album covers also.
Yes. Now, I can't remember the name of the artist who did that, but it was quite a well-respected photographer that Creed saw the creativity and the beauty of his album covers. Do you know that? Remember that guy's name?
No, I don't.
Yeah. He was a famous photographer, but Creed always just looked for quality everywhere, the album covers, the music, everything else.
You know, I'm a avid fan of James Brown, the Godfather of Soul.
Yeah.
And here it is, a man by way of Kentucky. And you have these jazz chops, but your first foray into the industry really is with the Godfather of Soul.
That is correct. It's so how did a music school graduate who was a jazz musician and jazz fan, how did that guy get hooked up with the Godfather of Soul? It was more chance than anything else. I was playing in this band, a 5-piece, 6-piece band in Cincinnati. We were playing in Mount Adams, which was the hip kind of Greenwich Village area of Cincinnati, and it was a really, really great band. The leader, Jimmy McGarry, the sax player, was a great musician. So anyway, we were very, very popular and kind of, I guess, very hip. And so one night, James Brown's production coordinator named Bud Hobgood brought James to this place to hear us play, and he told me he really, really liked us, and he wanted to record us. And we said, "Oh wow, James Brown's going to record us." It was very exciting. He said, but I need you to come to the studio, King Records studio, and make a demo. He says, a lot of times guys sound real good in the club and everybody's drinking and having fun, but when you put them on tape, they don't sound that good. So I need to hear a demo of you on tape. So we made an appointment and we went out to King Records studio, and it turned out just when we got there, the time that we had booked, a paying customer had bought that time, so they canceled our session. So we're standing around in the hallway getting ready to go home when all of a sudden James called Bud Hopgood and he said, "I need an arranger. Get me an arranger." Well, the guys in my band point at me to Bud Hopgood and say, "Dave's a great arranger." And Hopgood says, "Well, this is not jazz. This is funk. This is," and they say, "Don't worry, Dave can write anything." So he gave me a chance, and James gave me 6 tunes to arrange. I didn't really quite know what I was doing, arranging funk tunes.
But you were coming from the straight ahead jazz world and coming into the funk soul world.
Well, I also loved Jimmy Smith, the organ player, was kind of funky, and Hank Crawford, and there were some funky kind of things. The first time I ever heard honky tonk, Bill Doggett, was it?
King Records?
It was King Records. That is right. First time I heard it, it just grabbed me, and I bought the record. It's the first record I ever bought, and I wore it out listening to it. But so I had some connection and influence to soul music. And James Brown funk is one version of soul music. James and his drummers came up with this new kind of revolutionary funky beat. It was, I think, it's partly influenced by the Latin bands, but the Latin bands almost never play on one. It's always something ending up on four or some kind of stuff. But James took those kind of Latin rhythms and he put the one on it, and with that big strong first beat in the bar, it became what we now know of as funk. And I think James really deserves a lot of credit in being the originator of what we now call funk. James couldn't read or write music, but he would sing licks to his band, and he'd sing licks to the drummer. Y'all play this boom, and he'd sing licks to the horn players, and Pee Wee would harmonize it or something, and it was all kind of a oral tradition, so to speak. Nothing was ever written down till I got there. Then I started using New York studio musicians to get a slightly different sound for the James Brown records, and the rest is history.
You know, you and Pee Wee have a little history too. I mean, you guys worked with Esther Phillips on Kudu.
That is correct. Creed recognized Pee Wee's talent. Pee Wee's the guys in Pee Wee's and James' band called Pee Wee a genius, which I'm going to have to agree with. Once I started working with James, and people around, first Cincinnati, then New York, recognized me as able to write good funky grooves. Me and Pee Wee never actually worked together on the same project, but we did the same thing for James. And I have a great respect for Pee Wee.
What was it about Mr. Ellis's musicianship that enhanced? Because he was responsible for co-writing some of his most prolific records.
Yes, he certainly was, but there's no way to know which ones, because James, he would take people's creative work and put his own name on it, frequently, and then to pay those people back, he would have some record that he did is getting ready to go out and sell, and he would put that person, me or Pee Wee's name on the record. So you can't really tell from looking whose name's on the record who actually did it. So I don't know which ones Pee Wee did, and I know which ones I did. but no, it was, okay, let me tell you this story. I think the reason I became a full-time James Brown arranger was James was always playing with people's minds. I'll put it in a clean way. And just messing. He liked to mess with people because he could. And so I think one day Maceo and Pee Wee and Fred and that rhythm section, I think they got tired of it. And I think they decided if he does this again, we're leaving. And so, of course, he did it again, and they were down in South Carolina. James toured all year long, yeah. They were down in South Carolina somewhere, and the band walked down on James. That's when James called Bud Hopgood in Cincinnati and said, "Get me a band here now." So we had been doing some studio recording with some young, really, really talented players in Cincinnati. Bootsy Collins and his brother Phelps, who's known as Catfish, I think, and they had this little funk band. And Bootsy was great when he was 17 or maybe 16. And so we had been using them for some studio sessions, and so Hopgood shipped them off to South Carolina. The story I heard from Bootsy later was they landed the plane. They went straight to the theater. They didn't have uniforms. They didn't have rehearsal. Didn't have anything. Just James made up a show. They knew his famous songs. So then after that first night, he just rehearsed them and rehearsed them and rehearsed them until they became what is now known as the JBs. So but I think when the original James Brown band, Pee Wee and Maceo quit, that's when James called Hopgood and said, "Get me an arranger," because his arranger, Pee Wee, had left. And so that's when I became James Brown's arranger.
That'll do it again for another edition of the Pace Report, reporting live here at the famous Birdland Jazz Club here in New York City for the official New York record release of Dave Matthews' brand new record, Sir, which features the legendary Eddie Gomez and Steve Gadd. I'd like to personally congratulate and thank Mr. Matthews for his time, as well as the staff and management here at Birdland for their warm hospitality. Please like, share, and subscribe to my videos here on YouTube and Vimeo. And please visit my website, thepacereport.com, for my weekly column, as well as my past segments. Until next time, remember, if it's in the groove, it'll make you move. Till next time, peace.